talk, is a world war inevitable? The Bible's answers from the book of the Bible, Ezekiel chapter 38 from the New International Version. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, set your face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Prophesy against him and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against you, O Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. I will turn you around, put hooks in your jaw and bring you out with your whole army, your horses, your horsemen fully armed, and a great horde with large and small shields, all of them brandishing their swords. Persia, Cush, and Put will be with you, all their shields and helmets, also Gomer with all its troops, and Beth Togarmah from the far north with all its troops, the many nations with you. Get ready, be prepared, you and all the hordes gathered about you, and take command of them. After many days you will be called to arms. In future years you will invade a land that has recovered from war, whose people were gathered from the many nations to the mountains of Israel, which had long been desolate. They had been brought out from the nations, and now all of them live in safety. You and all your troops and many nations with you will go up, advancing like a storm. You will be like a cloud covering the land. This is what the sovereign Lord says. On that day, thoughts will come into your mind, and you will devise an evil scheme. You will say, I will invade a land of unwalled villages. I will attack a peaceful and unsuspecting people, all of them living without walls and without gates and bars. I will plunder and loot and turn my hand against the resettled ruins and the people gathered from the nations, rich in livestock and goods, living in the center of the land, Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish. And all our villages will say to you, have you come to plunder? Have you gathered your hordes to loot, to carry off silver and gold, to take away livestock and goods, and to seize much plunder? Therefore, Son of man, prophesy and say to Gog, this is what the sovereign Lord says, in that day, when my people Israel live in safety, you will not take notice of it. You will come from your place in the far north, you and many nations with you, all of them riding on horses, a great horde and mighty army. You will advance against my people Israel like a cloud that covers the land. In days to come, O Gog, I will bring you against my land, so that the nations will know me when I show myself holy through you before their eyes. This is what the sovereign Lord says. Are you not the one I spoke of in former days by my servant, the prophets of Israel? At that time, they prophesied for years that I would bring you against them. This is what will happen in that day. When Gog attacks the land of Israel, my hot anger will be aroused, declares the sovereign Lord. In my zeal and fiery wrath, I declare that at that time there shall be a great earthquake in the land of Israel. The fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the beasts of the field, every creature that moves along the ground, and all the people on the face of the earth will tremble at my presence. The mountains will be overturned, the cliffs will crumble, and every wall will fall to the ground. I will summon a sword against Gog on all my mountains, declares the sovereign Lord. Every man's sword will be against his brother. I will execute judgment upon him with plague and bloodshed. I will pour down torrents of rain, hailstones and burning sulfur on him, and on his troops, and on the many nations with him. And so I will show my greatness and my holiness, and I will make myself known in the sight of many nations. Then they will know that I am the Lord. And now I ask Mr. Christian Williams to speak to the topic, is world war inevitable? The Bible's answers.
Thank you, Matthew. From the outset, I'd like to say that we as Christadelphians are not supportive of war. We are a pacifist Christian religion, and we are not intending to be alarmist at all. We don't want to alarm people that war is inevitable and your life is going to end and That's not the intention for tonight, but all we want to show you is that the Bible holds answers in regards to the future of this earth. It doesn't just give a horrible picture of war, it also provides a hope, and that's what I also intend to show you tonight. We feel that it's our duty to let people know what we know from God's Word. And I hope what I show you tonight will present to you what we do know in a logical manner and in a believable manner. I hope it does that tonight. So the Bible does warn us of an extreme stress that will come upon the world in the form of war and battle. Without a doubt, you would have heard of the word Armageddon, and even today that brings up pictures of a nuclear holocaust and awful things like that. But it could be argued that the world is already under stress. After some comments and discussion with some people, I think you'll find they have, living in a relatively safe place like Australia, we tend to put our head in the sand because we are relatively safe. And as you know, as you all would have heard, COVID-19 is beginning to spread in Sydney again, and they're doing their best to stop it. And Australia has been very successful at preventing the spread of COVID up till now, and we pray that that will continue. But what that does create is a sense of security in this country. Things that are happening in the rest of the world are not yet happening here. We can only see it on the media. And so we have deniers, people that deny that these things are happening because they can't see it with their own eyes. They think that the media is lying. The same thing can happen with the Bible. Because you can't see it happening, it's hard to believe. So this attitude, I think, is reflected by people's levels of hope. In Romans 8 verse 24, the Apostle Paul, he wrote, and this is a word of wisdom that would even resonate with us today without it coming from the Bible, but hope that is seen is not hope at all. Who hopes for what they already have? We have security in this country. We have a government that gives us money, welfare. We don't have deaths from COVID. We aren't affected by war. We are all well fed. What have we got to hope for? But I think we really need to expand our minds and think beyond our country and start to think worldwide. A hard thing to do because it is fearful to think of what's happening in the rest of the world. But like I said, that's not our intention. We intend to give you the facts and also what the Bible tells us. So if you are still listening to this presentation, you have an open mind and you also hope for something better, whether it's from God or in this world, something better man-made, man-created. You can also see the big picture in this world. You can see the world is in trouble politically and environmentally. You will be able to see the tensions that are happening between the large superpowers like Russia and America and the UN. They've just recently had talks and they seem to be getting along, but there is tension there. The Apostle Paul also writes in verse 25 of Romans 8, "But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently." And that's what we're trying to encourage people to do, is to look at the big picture, hope that it's going to get better, and wait for it patiently. But what provides that hope? We'll look at that towards the end of my talk. But first of all, I'd like to present you with some Bible prophecies that have happened, that predicted to happen, and were shown to have happened in human history. In Daniel chapter 2, verse 31, we have a dream recorded by a king called Nebuchadnezzar. He was a real king, and you can look him up in any history books, of the great king he was the great king of Babylon, which recently was found by archaeologists. So it's not a made-up king, it's not a made-up story. Daniel was in fact captured by the Babylonian Empire and made to serve as an advisor to the king because he was so knowledgeable. He was a trained and intelligent person, and he was able to be shown by God what was going to happen in the future. This dream and its meaning was revealed to Daniel, and in verse 32, we have an outline of human history for the next approximately, I think it was 2,000 years. Correct me if I'm wrong, I didn't research that. I was meant to research that. Which, in this time, nations would rise to power and dominate over other nations. And this, in fact, did happen. It was given before any of these nations, except Babylon, that existed as superpowers. So the head of gold was Babylon. And Daniel told the king that the head was symbolic of Babylon. So if we go through history and we match up, Daniel isn't told who those nations are, but we can work out by looking at his history books, comparing who the next power came in. So historically, the nation of Persia, the Medes and the Persians, came after Babylon. They destroyed them, and then came the Greeks, and then after that, the Roman Empire, and then divided Europe, leading to how it exists today, in a semi-united and weak conglomeration of religious and political powers. Further on in Daniel, in chapter 7, verse 3 to 8, we're given detail of what these nations would be like. And it does indeed match the characteristics of those nations that came to power at that time. We have to link the image to the dreams, and we need to link the dreams to Daniel's vision. We have 4 beasts here that match up to those 4 parts of the image. We've got the Babylonian Empire, which was represented by the lion. The bear was the Medes and the Persians. Greece was represented by a leopard. And then a beast more terrible than all of those, which was the Roman Empire. So in Daniel chapter 7, we're given detail of what these nations would be like. So Babylon was like a lion. It had wings of an eagle, and he watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it. So a lion is a terrible creature, but it was given wings so that it was able to fly, and symbolically that means that they were able to conquer in a more dramatic way. And the mind of a human, quite possibly, was that it had ability to think, and it was quite an intelligent sort of nation, but not intelligent enough, because they were defeated quite easily by the Medes and the Persians, and Babylon was destroyed. And then the second beast rose, which looked like a bear, and it raised up on one of its sides. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, "Get up and eat your fill of flesh." So the Medes and the Persians characteristics were that the three ribs in its mouth were the great Achaemenid kings of Persia who ruled over the largest empire in the Near East. There were 12 kings. It had three rivals, which it eventually destroyed, and these are the ribs in its mouth. And those three rivals were, of course, Babylon, Egypt, and Lydia. Rivals who wanted to be the next superpower. The leopard was, on its back, it had four wings, like those of a bird. It had four heads, and it was given authority to rule. This leopard was representative of Alexander the Great's reign. The wings gave it speed and the ability to conquer a huge amount of area. And Alex did conquer a huge area in a short time. The four heads are the four leaders his territory were given to lead after he passed on. They were given to Ptolemy, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Cassander. So four heads, four rulerships in four parts of the kingdom of the Greek Empire. And then the Greek Empire were overrun by the great Roman Empire. Iron teeth, brazen claws. The brazen claws are a symbol of the held philosophies of the Greeks, believe it or not. They held on to a lot of the philosophy, and it gave them a large foothold in the area of Greece as well. So Daniel is then told further on that this beast would exist when the Ancient of Days rules. A lot of prophecy is given about this time, and we might look at that a little bit later if we get time, but it's a little bit irrelevant. We can probably look at that another time, another lecture, another presentation. So if you come to Revelation chapter 13, God doesn't change, and his message is the same. When God speaks and when God writes his word through the inspiration of men who write these things down, he never contradicts himself. So we find in Revelation 13 verse 11, we've got this same beast, which became Europe, the beast of Rome. It's now changed and morphed into something different. And this beast even exists today in a somewhat subdued manner, but it will rear its head again. The red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns. How do we know this is a continuation of the Holy Roman Empire? We've got an example, the 7 hills in Rome. You might think it's just a coincidence. We've got the 10 toes of the image, representing the 10 barbarian tribes that became Europe as it is today. So here we have some detail of the history of the Roman Empire made holy, I say holy, by Constantine, who used Christianity to build up his empire. And he persecuted the true Christians who would not conform to his mixture of paganism and Christianity. And over time, the Protestants arose and exist even today, the Protestant religions. We don't have time to go on with every vision that Daniel had and every vision in Revelation. I was just giving you a little picture of how the world has been up till now. There's been war after war after war, and nations fighting over territory and fighting over, food and resources is the word I was looking for. So hopefully that's shown you that the Bible is indeed a prophetic book. In a very short time, I've tried to do that, but we can talk about it more. You're welcome to contact us. What the Bible does now, and I want to show you, is that it actually predicts the future. It doesn't give huge detail, but it does give us a picture in the language of Daniel and Revelation of future powers and empires that will rise up. Revelation, as I said, goes on to speak about the demise of the Holy Roman Empire. And then the rise of the beast, the same beast, but different and even more terrible. This beast hasn't appeared yet, but it is there, waiting to come. What does it look like? It looks like all the beasts before it, the qualities of all the nations that have risen to power over human history. It was a military power with the support of the religious and political powers of Europe. So there is some debate as to who the military power is that will rise, that will get support of the Holy Roman Empire or the Roman Catholic Church as it is today. Who is this military power that will get the support of Europe? Who is this beast? Apart from being the powers that exist against God, and some churches would call that the devil, or Satan being loosed out of the pit and coming and marking everyone on the head with the number of the beast, all that sort of thing. We're not going to go into that tonight, but here in Ezekiel 38, which we read tonight, is a picture of the prophecy given to Ezekiel of the future. And how do we know it's the future? Because some of the things that he speaks of have not happened yet, especially towards the end. They have happened in part. Israel has come back as a nation and has been given, after being persecuted, it has come back, and it's come back to some relative sort of power in the Middle East. But there hasn't been an invasion from the north yet, from the north of Israel. This nation is spoken of in Revelation. It is this beast, great and terrible. So let's look at Ezekiel 38, verse 2. Son of man, he says, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. And also in Revelation 20, verse 8, exactly the same prophecy with not quite as much detail as Ezekiel is given, but he says there, and this is as an introduction to what we're going to look at, I will go out and will go out to deceive the nations in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, and to gather them for battle. In number, they are like the sand on the seashore. Just remember that, sand on the seashore. How much sand is on the seashore? They marched across the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of God's people, the city he loves. But fire came down from heaven and devoured them. I'm going to surmise that the nation to the north is in fact Russia. And although we're not given the name, we get a little bit of the feeling of who it might be. And with some detail of Russia's capabilities at the moment, it seems to match the prophecy. So Gog is the name of some northern nation, according to Bible Dictionary. Magog is a barbarous northern nation. Magog was actually a descendant of Japheth, who came out of the ark with Noah in Genesis chapter 10, verse 2. The word chief is the Hebrew Rosh, meaning the one at the top. Sounds a little bit like Russia, Rosh, one at the top. Prince, which is king or governor. Meshech and Tubal, also descendants of Japheth. So the descendants of Japheth all went up to the north and settled there and became the nations that exist around that area, the Slavic and the Russian peoples, all those people up there in the north. So Russia today. The Russian armed forces are one of the largest military forces in the world. As of 2019, the military comprised of 1 million active personnel, the fourth largest in the world. Additionally, there are over 2.5 million reservists, with the total number of reserve troops possibly being as high as 20 million. Do you remember the sand of the seashore? If 20 million people came down and invaded Israel, that would classify, I think, as many as the sand of the seashore. Russia and Ukraine. Just recently, there's been a lot of tension on the border of Russia and Ukraine. It's been escalating, and there's a huge number of troops that Russia placed near the borders. Given that the Russian troop movements are apparently their largest since the Second World War, it seems unlikely that such an action is being used for defensive or intimidation reasons. And I got that from a news article. It should have been on there, but it's not. It might be on the next page. More recently, however, it was announced that Russia will begin to pull back from the Ukraine border, which it did quite recently, which has caused this decision. What caused this decision after weeks of tension cannot be said with absolute certainty, but it's worth exploring. Russia continues to stick to its claims that its reasons for its military deployment was simply for a show of strength, and is now pulling back up after achieving this goal. However, it has been noted recently that the United States is considering intervening in the growing tensions to support Ukraine. And they do that by providing them with armaments and weapons. It should be noted that nothing seems to be set in stone, and American involvement is only a possibility at this point. Even so, given its strength as a superpower, as well as the close timing of these updates on the conflict, it is not unreasonable to think that Russia's decision to withdraw might come from reluctance to risk openly engaging with the US in addition to Ukraine. So this was a few weeks ago. But even closer to now, something else has happened, and I think it comes up after. Analysts have long argued that energy is the major driver of Moscow's policies in the region of the Middle East. According to one expert, Russia has multiple reasons to intervene in the Eastern Mediterranean. Along its main regional interest is increasing world energy prices, and we know that's happening. Petrol prices are going up all the time. The Russian economy is largely the business of exporting in the business of exporting oil and gas, and this has been true for decades. The Mediterranean is a significant component of Moscow's military strategy. The Mediterranean is an area of great power, according to the elite of Russia. And they compete with NATO and the United States for bases there. Clients like the Syrian Arab Army, who Russia supply weapons to, there's still hardships that face Russian defence economics, like the availability of money and the state of their shipyards. Moscow's power projection agenda in the Mediterranean is far more realistic and effective strategy for the Russian Navy than the pursuit of a global blue water posture to challenge US naval supremacy. And that's from Carnegie Europe. So here we have all the bases that exist around the Middle East today, as far as those sources tell us, but they would be quite visible and probably well researched, all around the Middle East. And in answer to that, we have all the bases in red there. You probably can't see it very well, but all the bases that exist by NATO, which are the Allied powers trying to protect that region from war. NATO and its members keep Russia's military deployment in the Mediterranean and the Black Sea under close watch. The alliance's efforts are made easier by the return to a peaceful relationship between the US administration and its European partners, the EU and NATO. Going forward, these efforts should focus on three main areas. So why Russia? Something just happened recently in the Black Sea. And this is a true story, a true account. General Sir Nick Carter, who I think is an Australian or British, I think he's British, general, says he is kept awake at night by fear of war with Russia in the Black Sea. So this is a general who's shaking in his boots because he fears a war. Chief of Defence Staff's concerns came after warning shots were fired at HMS Defender by Russian forces in contested waters off Crimea coast this week. That's just this week gone. General Carter, 62, said incident was an example where a miscalculation could come from an unwarranted escalation. British Type 45 destroyer sailed within a 12-mile limit of Crimea near Cape Filen in the Black Sea. And Russia claims that as its own territory, but the West sees it as international waters. So there's some tensions there as to who owns it. So there is tensions in that area even today. But that shouldn't make us fear. Sorry, that should not make us fear. Someone is going to stand up to this invading army who comes into Israel, as we read in Ezekiel 38. In verse 22, God says, I will execute judgment on him, that is Gog and Magog, and pour down torrents of rain, hailstones, and burning sulphur on him and his troops, and on the many nations that are with him. So we're given a picture that it's not just Russia, it's their allies, those who join with them. And in Ezekiel 38, we read that it's places like Persia, which is Syria today, that will join them to come against Israel. And I will show my greatness and my holiness, and I will make myself known in the sight of many nations, and they will know that I am the Lord. So this invasion of Israel, is it the world war we're talking of? Is it Armageddon? Will the earth be destroyed by a nuclear holocaust, as many fear? Luke chapter 21, Jesus himself prophesied and said, there will be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars. On the earth, nations will be in anguish and perplexity at the roaring and tossing of the sea. People will faint from terror, apprehensive of what is coming on the world. For the heavenly bodies will be shaken, and at that time they will see the Son of Man coming in power with clouds and great glory. When these things begin to take place, lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing nigh. So the world's redemption is coming with the return of the Lord Jesus Christ. So what brings these nations down against Israel, and why do they come? Why does Russia and the nations that support it come down? They come down for resources. I was just thinking, if all the cars in the world became electric and they had to make electric cars, what are they primarily made out of? They're made out of plastic, and plastic is made from oil. So oil is still going to be greatly needed by the world, even in their pursuit of clean power. And we have nations that will stand up against Russia. We have in Ezekiel 38, Sheba, Dedan, and the merchants of Tarshish. And these are shown to be allies of Great Britain, the young lions, the original merchants of Tarshish. And that's Australia, Canada, probably America, and a number of other nations that are part of the allied forces that make up NATO today. And what will they say to this northern power? What have you come down for? You've come down for resources. And that will be where Armageddon will start. But it won't get much past there before God intervenes. This is when God will act. God will be revealed and will destroy Gog and anyone who affiliates with them with a giant earthquake, when all remaining allied nations will see God's holiness and greatness. He will be seen. There is plenty more to tell you, but tonight we are only looking at the question of the title. There is hope. We are in an allied country. We all have hope. If this nation to the north invades the Middle East, we can all look up and see the salvation of God that he has offered. God fights for us. We don't fight. We are pacifists who let God do the fighting for us, because he is a just God and knows the heart and mind of every human. We don't desire the death of people. We want them to join in the hope that we share. So, as he says in Luke 21, verse 25 to 28, join us in lifting up our heads, because our redemption draweth nigh, and that is the return of our Lord Jesus Christ. Thank you.